she's like, when we go into the cemetery, there's going to be people. And the people are in, the tombs are broken open. And people are sleeping in those tombs with the bodies. And they're going to come out. They're going to be curious what you're doing there. She goes, I'm just warning you. When I tell you it's time to go, it's time to go. So we go down to the cemetery, and I remember it's like a maze. The big cemetery in Port-au-Prince, several city blocks, and you're just going through the eyes inside of these broken tombs, kind of looking out, and kind of coming out like a Thriller video, and like, who are these guys? What are they doing in the cemetery? And so I remember she had told me, and I heard this from other sources, that if you want to make an offering to the Baron spirit, you find the oldest grave in the cemetery, and that is where you can leave an offering for the Baron. There's not a proper shrine. But of course, we are in voodoo capital of the world, other than Benin, of course, and there's a giant concrete black cross, and it's matte black. It was like the flattest paint I'd ever seen in my life. Just was something about it was very shocking, stunning. This very square, very kind of brutalist cross. There's all these offerings around it. So we went there with a gourd that has harang sal, which is like the almost like a salted codfish that we had to cook over the fire and burning our hands while we're doing it. We had to use our hands. We had plantains that we had to cook over the fire and turn it on the coals because we're doing this work. We're going to make an offering to the Baron. And then she put an oil in there and she put hot peppers. So this mushy, spicy thing that when we would do a ceremony later, it would be kind of chopped up and everything's mashed up, and then it's taken like a communion way from us. This like very spicy communion. But we were leaving it to the spirit. So I remember we're going there, and so Ola's there, and now Ola's like the rock star of the cemetery. This guy who plays the Baron character. And he's walking around and everyone knows him. It's like the king has arrived, and he's doing call and response to everyone. And then there was a gentleman who came out with a whip, and he climbed to the top of these crypts, and he's whipping the sky, as they said, because the spirits were coming to ride us. They didn't want us to get ridden by the spirits. So it's kind of a funny story, but I go and I have this gourd, and I'm like, okay. She's like, okay, turn this way, turn that way, do this, do that, and then put the gourd down. Do that, and when I put down, it hits the concrete, and the pepper oil splashes into my eye. And I'm trying to be very cool about it, but I'm like, okay. And then she thought I was being possessed, so she kind of tackles me and has this powder, and she's rubbing this powder. She's like, hold on. And I'm like, no, there's just pepper oil in my eye. and so we kind of finished up that ceremony, and then you could see things were getting hard to describe. Things were getting increasingly chaotic. And she said, it's time to go. We have to go now.
Justin Fornal is an explorer, author, extreme athlete, and open water swimmer. He is best described as a cultural detective, focusing on vanishing cultural traditions and rituals in the world's crisis zones. If you're as passionate about adventure and adventure stories as we are, you can support our work by simply buying us a cup of coffee. The link is in the show notes below. Now, back to our interview. Justin Fornal, welcome to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to this talk as we share a common interest in exploring cultures from the wild places. And you have just taken it to a new level. I've just seen some of your work, and it's fascinating. I really like it.
Thank you.
So welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Mike. How you doing?
Doing well. As you know, as a tradition in this on this podcast, we always have our guests tell a good drinking story. Do you have one for us?
I sure do. And that it actually works with a map. So it actually is about what's in this bottle here. You can see that's a map on the back. That is a map of Islay, Scotland, a place that I say is home to the greatest whiskeys in the world in terms of single malt scotches. That's where you get everything that's smoky, everything that's peaty. So you've got Laphroaig, Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Bunahab, and Bruichladdich. And I really fell in love with these spirits. And then so back in 2016, I spoke with the folks over at Laphroaig, and I said, I really want to do a swim for you guys. And they said, well, why don't you do a swim from, Islay to Ireland? And I said, it was about 30 miles, big swim, North Atlantic, tough swim. And then kind of to figure out what we could do next. And then we met with a company called Single Cask Nation. And they said, hey, we think we're going to get behind this expedition. What are you going to do? So I said, well, how about I don't think anyone has ever swam 100 miles around Isla. And in fact, not only swim around Isla, but do it with a 50-gallon oak barrel. And as we go, we stop at every distillery along the coast because all these beautiful distilleries are right on the water. And it makes it, especially they've been around since the 1800s. It made it more convenient for, when you're actually shipping as opposed to taking things by air. And so myself, Chad Anderson, a Scotsman named Johnny Mundell, the three of us set off for an 8-day swimming expedition going around Isla. And with us, we took a barrel that was usually in the boat because the company who was paying for this expedition said, "Look, we want the whiskey. We're not worried if you guys crash in the rocks. We're not worried about it. But God damn, if that whiskey gets damaged." And then along the way, contributions were made from each of these distilleries. And then it had to, once we landed, we started Ardbeg, we went all the way around. So if you're looking at a map, we had a massive party at Ardbeg on the last day. We came ashore, we'd been out, and we could only swim about 6 hours a day because when those tides change, once again, I hope we're looking at that map, you're going backwards, or you're getting pushed into the Quarry of Wreck and Whirlpool, or you're getting dashed against the rocks. There's no playing with that ocean over there. And when we finished that, it matured in that cask for 6 months. And this beautiful company, Single Cask Nation, released 180 of those bottles for sale. And it came with a little booklet talking about the swim, the expedition, all kinds of maps. So when I heard about your podcast, I said, it's one of the, for me, two of my favorite things in life. And oftentimes they do go together, which is whiskey and maps.
Isn't that so true?
Absolutely.
In fact, it was funny because when I was listening to some of your work, you actually do sit down with a map and a glass of whiskey with your baits to figure out where you want to go.
That's really one of my. I will look at a map for hours and I'll come back to it. And anytime, I don't take the subway that often, but when I do, I just bring a map to occupy my time, and I just will look at like the smaller towns and look at routes I might go, and then I'll write things down of who lives here or who lives in this town. We did a big expedition a few years ago. We drove 1,600 miles through East Africa, starting all the way in Tanzania and then through Rwanda, all the way through Uganda. And one of the things we did before that expedition is we knew the things we had to do, but then I said, what else is there that we might want to do? And what other stories we might want to tell? So I just looked up all these little spots you might never look at. You might never think to stop, and just kept looking up, what ethnic group lives here? What are they known for? What foods are in the area? Looked up the name of all these towns to see if there was a news story, something interesting that might have happened. And so many good things came of that. And then a lot of stories for National Geographic came of that, for Vice, a few different periodicals. And it all just comes from kind of doing things overland as opposed to getting in a plane. It takes longer, but along the way, if you're in a car and your friends are driving, you just keep stop. Take your time, stop, look around. Oh, there's another market. Oh, do we have to stop at another market? And I said, we've never been in this market. There's something in this market, and I've said this before. In almost every market around the world, there's one thing there, at least, that's in no other market in the world. Something that's very hyper-local. It might be an old woman who's, making a cough medicine from salamanders. It may be a tea of some plant that's, it grows other places, but no one else knows how to use it. And it's just like, you got to stop at all these markets, walk around, look around. Okay, there's nothing really here. Oh, wait, what is that? What did they paint their nails with? Why are their nails that stain of orange? Oh, that's what someone might use for henna in their hair, but they're dyeing their nails with it, Well, how are you guys making the henna? Where's the henna grow? Oh, they're also using it for this medicine we've never even considered,
Oh yeah, those little places. I mean, that brings up when I was India recently. We were out on the road going to this sacred mountain. We just stopped at this little coffee kiosk just by the side of the road. But He was a master coffee maker. I mean, we saw him grind all of the ingredients that they put in. And then, it was almost ritualistic how he made the coffee, this masala coffee. And it tasted good. And you would never expect it. If you drove by there, just say it doesn't seem like anything. But, those are the jewels to find.
Yeah, and you might think, this is the same thing we saw in the last 10 towns. But then, no, it isn't. This guy is a local celebrity. And, everybody else, they could get this any day. But for us, we may never pass this way again. Let's stop and check out this guy's coffee,
Yeah, and just get to talk to him.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, you did a talk Before the Explorers Club, that really interests me is talismans, amulets, and the material of rituals.
Sure, material culture of ritual. Yeah.
Material culture of rituals. What was the thesis behind that?
Sure. One of my central focuses of study when I travel, you have a few things that really are things I seek out. One is traditional textile production. These are things, and once again, it's things that tie a society back to the old ways. And that's always what I'm turned on by and always looking for, is something that may be on its last generation. And a lot of times you see this thing in textile production. And a lot of times, yes, we can buy cheap textiles. We can get stuff shipped in. We can get things that are dyed using grit dyes. But we still have an attachment to this thing that is of a higher value, it's of a greater value. Then we have traditional foodways. Of course, as the world gets increasingly globalized, of course, there's just more convenient food coming in, more stuff that's coming in from other places. But there are those dishes that are of that land, And I like to say that if we go back far enough in history, people were eating food that was both plants and animals that were within 20 miles of where they were, out of convenience. So all the things that are now varmints and weeds were once, this is what we're eating. We don't have farm-raised cows, chickens, pigs, goats. We have anything as hunters and gatherers that are within 20 miles of us. All these plants that's just a yard full of weeds. That was it. That was the garden. The things that were growing already, until we have obviously farming traditions and we're picking and choosing what we want to grow. So the foodways are second. And then thirdly, I really find the most profound connection to the ancient world and modern society is really through ritual. And even if we're looking at places that have been adopted by choice or otherwise, big religion, the monotheistic religions, Abrahamic religions, at one point those religions were not there. Those are very new spiritual practices, in terms of the extent of humanity. So if we look at the rituals, we look at the talismans, even if these are practicing Christians or Muslim, Jewish, or even Hindu people, there will be little whispers and footprints of the ancient ways. And a lot of times that's in the form of protection rituals. And the material of those is usually talismans, amulets. Small things that we might carry. You might have a lucky penny that an uncle gave you, with an Indian head penny or a buffalo nickel or something that was really old that was passed down, and that has some kind of purpose that you're like, I got to go for that big job interview today. Let me put my lucky penny in my jacket pocket. Things can be simple and they can be created and they can be hyper local. It might just be your family who's like, we all wear our high school football socks when we go to the game to see my old high school play. Oh, I don't know. Is that part of your religion? No, it's something we adopted that we just makes us feel like we have some control over that which is beyond our control. And that's why no matter where you go in the world, no matter what the surface level and what people tell you at the gate of like, we can't do that, that's against what we practice as a society, you are going to find protection rituals, amulets, talismans in absolutely every corner of the world. And so that when I seek those things out, a lot of times people won't say, I'm like, do you have a ritual? What do you mean do we have a ritual? No, we don't do any rituals. But then I'll be like, you know what? I'm a little worried about my trip back home. I've got a long flight. I got a really questionable layover. I have a great grandfather who's sick. And then they're like, suddenly, well, you know what? There is something we do. And I'd like to go through this experience. I'm willing to, I have to, if we're going to a professional, of course, what do they charge ahead of time? And then all of a sudden, you're on the inside. All of a sudden, like, holy shit, this is really elaborate. This is amazing. It went from everybody acting like I was going to get them arrested to suddenly, the deeper you go, the more things people are comfortable showing you. And obviously, if you don't have a camera or a film crew, people are going to share a lot more, Well,
that brings me and brings us to talking about Detective Zubari and Tanzanian witches. Tell us about that.
Sure. So this is pipe tobacco, by the way. This is a very special Christmas blend I'm enjoying. Fires of the Levy by Cornell and Deal. Fantastic small batch stuff just as an explorer. Something that I feel like goes with whiskey is a good pipe tobacco. But so I was in, this went back originally to, I think once again, kind of around 2016, 2017, was working as a producer on a show about alcohol. And in my downtime, I was researching this phenomena of witches kidnapping people with albinism in Tanzania and dismembering them and using their body parts for these amulets. One of our security team on the film crew was this Detective Schubert. And, he found out I wasn't just, some film guy from LA who wanted to talk about old Seinfeld episodes and compare our Bitcoin. I'm like, no, fuck that shit. I'm not going to stay at the hotel. What are you doing on your off day? Let's hang out. And he's like, we had a connection. And so we immediately became friends, and he started taking me around and started telling me about the witch. And so what I learned and continued to learn was that, you have form of witchcraft. These witches are known as Chawi. And the magic that they practice is called Tunguli magic. And Tunguli being a Swahili word for a small gourd, for these Tunguli gourds. And the more I learned about it is that these gourds, when these witches it doesn't have to just be, human body parts. Certainly not. A lot of Tunguli magic is a plant magic. You'll take these small cauldrons and you'll put in pieces of herbs, maybe, again, a lucky piece of fabric, but certainly there's a thing of ancestor worship where there might be a person who was a great speaker and they recently died, and you're going to take their tongue and you're going to dry it out. So everything's pulverized in there. Think of it like a spice mixture, but it's a spiritual spice mixture. And of course, unfortunately, unfortunately, but this region around Lake Eyasi in Tanzania has the highest population of PWAs, people with albinism, in the world. Where rest of the world, it's like 1 per 20,000 people. There, it's like 1 per 2,000 people. So you have this abnormally high amount of people with albinism, which make them a target. So you have, in this area, that's a lot of Chaga, a lot of other ethnic groups. You have these people who essentially are almost like a milk white, very pale eyes, whitish hair. And of course, the idea was that the spirits, if you want to get the job? Well, we tried your dead uncle's foot and the herbs and everything. Well, that didn't work. All right, let's kill, let's maybe get some goats. We'll do a sacrifice of spirit. That didn't work. Okay, well, you can get some money together and you want to win the election or you want the big job, we're going to kidnap this person to cut their arm off. It's going to be $3,000 for the arm, but that should work. That's what the spirits want. So the more I've researched kind of Muti-style killings, I want to call these across the board Muti-style killings, but it's a term for these kind of dismemberment killings. A lot of times it's just body parts being removed for the sake of sorcery or witchcraft. And a lot of times people die as a happenstance of the injury. A lot of times it's not like we're going to sacrifice this person. We're going to take parts off of a living person, oftentimes an innocent person, and we're going to use them for this work. And a lot of times, this is a horrific situation going on. People die because of this. Oftentimes, it's from what I've recorded, interviewing both witches, people with communities all around the world. A lot of times, these upsells are nothing more than an upsell, a con. As sick and twisted as it sounds, I constantly trying to find out what's the name of the spirit who's preferring the albino body parts. What's the spirit in Uganda that's looking for child sacrifice? And I'll talk about spirits, individuals will talk about spirits for a long time, and they're like, well, it's not for a particular spirit. And a lot of the witches who aren't practicing it say this has never been in any doctrine. None of this is part of this spiritual pantheon or this practice. It's criminality. It's a disgrace to our traditional forms of worship, Now,
he armed himself rather unusually, but probably for the job. What did he carry with him on his beat?
He had so many talismans. It was like, I can't even describe it. It was like my mom emptying her purse. Well, you need this for this. You need this for that. He just kept reaching in his pocket and instead of taking out weapons, he was taking out these different crazy amulets. Some were like bundled up pieces of paper, pieces of like goat skin that were written in blood. Others were like little bits of plants that were wrapped up in balls. He had them like all over his body, carrying them all over. And he said each one is for a different protection. And some of them were Islamic. Some of them were not Islamic, which is really fascinating. And you tend to see this in a lot of the countries that have an even and what I like to say harmonious division. You have, people living very peacefully, especially Christians and Muslims living side by side for generations upon generations. People are certainly intermarrying. And of course, you're kind of like, all right, well, if we have a bad cleric or, a bad spirited imam, yes, we want to use the Quran to do that. But I've heard situations where they may go to a Christian a spiritual worker to help them battle these things that are being put against them. And I've seen completely the same thing, especially in the case of Schubert mentioning this numerous occasions, that to beat these Witchawi witches, they were going to Islamic clerics and using the power words and things written from the Quran to protect you. And he would not take me to kind of seek out these witches and see what they were doing without going to his Islamic doctor and undergoing a protection with a belief system called Al-Badir. And Al-Badir is named after the Battle of Badir.
Now, that was quite a situation, that cleansing, protection. I don't know how you describe it, but tell us what they did to protect you as you went out with them.
Two really interesting things. And to get there and there's an article, we'll put a link for the article. I won't get into how long it took to get there. And it's just me being like, well, I got a good feeling about this guy. But if he's not a good guy, I'm so far from where anyone could hear me scream for or ever to be able to find me, and so we were out there way outside of Dar es Salaam, way past like these swamplands, and we were in a tuk-tuk that went partially under. I didn't know a tuk-tuk. I mean, I guess the engine is high, so our feet were underwater, and we're just like going through a swamp in a tuk-tuk to get to this guy's house. And when we got there, he was there with an assistant, and he had this little suit, like a whole lunchbox full of all these little, and he had all these jars full of like powders and plants. And so he made this little packet for me. And so this packet would be tied around your arm for protection. And so when we got there, he had all these different jars, and he's making a small packet for me. He's making this packet. And then I'm wearing the packet, and he's reading from a small book. And this book has the name of kind of the most famous warriors of this Battle of Badir. And he's reading these names and like blowing the names on me. And I've seen this multiple times with usage of the Quran as a form of blessing or protection, that they're speaking the words onto you, or they may speak the words and then blow into whatever they're using to protect you. So it's like these sacred words from this sacred text are in their mouth, and then they're speaking them, and they're putting these words into this liquid or this anointing oil, whatever it is. And then so when we were finished, he said, okay, that's it. And I said, well, I hate to ask for more here, but I need to know what you put in that packet. And that was very fascinating. So we sat down and he went through each item. And so we had things like a crushed up piece of lion bone. And they said, this is because the witches are going to send these powerful beasts after you. This lion within here will fight those beasts. Here's the scale from some dried out worms, because they're going to send worms into your stomach to make you sick. And so these worms will eat those worms. And he went on for about 12 items, breaking down that everything was almost like a little bit, it's like getting the flu shot. Everything was like a small incremental amount of something that was a bad thing that was going to protect me from my thing was more powerful than theirs. So I was having a little dosage. And then the last item he pulled out, which the only one that really, I was like, oh, these are all interesting and make sense. The last one was shocking. He took out a piece of rope and he said, I cut off a small piece of this rope. This rope was used in a suicide. Someone hung themselves. The farther you get in with the witches and they feel threatened, they're going to send a suicide spell to you, which is going to make you want to kill yourself. But you already have an anti-suicide piece by having this piece of rope in here. And then the whole thing was tied together. He had a gourd, a broken gourd, and he said, this Tanguli belonged to a powerful witch. This was their little, and that witch is dead. That witch was killed. And now you have the cauldron that ties it all together. So even though it's in this little tiny packet of black fabric tied around your arm, it's essentially within the cauldron, and it's operating in the same way as the Tanguli does as a small cauldron, because you have the cauldron in there.
Fascinating. Did you have any different feeling after leaving that place?
The different feeling was when he was reading. I'm sorry, and he did have his hand on my head. He had his hand on I remember his hot hand on my head, and I'm just there. I think I was on my knees, but kind of sitting on my butt. My knees are one of the only really things that hurt, kneeling, and it's not something I'm very good at. And I just remember him like, Jesus Christ, how long is this going to go on? I'm like trying to sit back and get comfortable. And I just remember his hand on my head, and he's just yelling these names. And I was feeling kind of this energy go in, feeling some energy coming from him when he was doing that. And then after that, I just went to research mode when I was writing stuff down, and I just had questions,
Interesting. Now, did you encounter any witches or those type of people when you were there?
Yeah, we met with a few Wachawi on that occasion, and on other occasions, I believe it was the next day. Actually, I'm sorry, it was a separate trip when I went back and I met the witches because we were on a tight schedule that first trip. And then we were going everywhere, going to where all the witches go shopping, buy all their stuff, buy their tangulis. This one young guy had like this giant thing, these gourds, and then he took me to a witch's house, one who said, well, I don't do any sacrifices. I don't do any of that stuff. But if I did, it would be this, and it would be this, and it would be this. And he had all these different tangulis, but they had different fabric tied around them. And the Wachawi operates with white, black, and red. White being for healing, black being for punishment or death or illness, and red being for also for blood. And these are these three different colors that everything had like different arrangements of these cloths. Some were like long strips, some were completely wrapped, some had some kind of paste on it. One was completely black with only black fabric on it. And like, well, this would be the gourd that if we were to put human parts in, it would be this gourd. So it was really interesting hearing just the, like visiting a shoemaker. And that's the level I like to get at when I'm speaking with spiritual workers, is not like the, oh my God, but just the practicality. This is your business. You're making a living off of this, and you know your stuff, and people, whether you're right or wrong or preying on people's superstitions, you are an authority of this information, and you're a craftsman or craftswoman. And, I do see, like I said, a lot of people, if I talk about something like, South American Southern hoodoo, I might say how one person did something and another hoodoo worker, that's wrong. Did you see the interview with that guy? He's wrong. It's bullshit. It's not fucking bullshit. It is up to the worker who's been passed on from their family, their tradition. Just as we said, if your family wearing lucky socks to your high school football games, the spiritual worker is kind of like a chef, scientist, and artist all combined into one, and they're using their own thoughts and intuitions in creating the recipe for these talismans.
And people would come to them to seek their advice and their powers to get well or have something happen, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of the workers that I've interacted with and interviewed, you're trying to, okay, so why is this person an authority? Of course, a lot of times it's inherited. I'm known within this community because going back 5 generations, just like a blacksmith or a shoemaker, this is who we are. And we are, but unlike a trade that's learned, it's learned, but it's also something we inherit as a talent. We have access to the spirits that you, the customer, don't have. That's why you have to come. Why? Because I can talk to spirits. There's evidence it works. And every worker has always told me, they want to tell you how great they are. That is the number one selling point, especially when I've dealt with, hoodoo workers, because there's no language barrier here in the U.S. They'll tell me about a court case. I made a mojo bag for this guy, and he did this and did that. And he walked in that courtroom, and he got off. Everybody knows that story. And then this other person came to me, and then the next day they, inherited or won all this money. So everyone has stories, testimonials. They love to share their testimony. You could call them right now. They'll tell you how good my talismans are.
When I was in Guatemala years ago, back in the Alta Verapaz regions, back in the backcountry, I befriended the Maya there, and they told me that there was essentially sort of 3 types of spirit workers. They had the white witches, the healers, and then the black witches. And did you ever encounter things like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. More recently, and this is in last quarter's Explorers Journal, which I believe was the fall issue or the summer issue. I did really the biggest project I'm working on in this capacity right now is about child sacrifice in Uganda, and it is a major problem. You'll read in that article, there was people who were considered dealing with black magic, and we suspected were sacrificing children or had sacrificed children in the past. Certainly, they weren't going to tell me as an outsider, just coming in to meet with them and talk with them. But there was other people, specifically a woman named Rose in Uganda, who was a spiritual worker who, once again, just made it clear to me. And she talked to me for hours. She was very comfortable, very proud of her traditions, and told me about 12 different spirits and what each one wants and what you can get in return. And once again, I asked her, I said, well, to which spirit would someone sacrifice, would do a muti killing or sacrifice a child? And she says, there is no specific spirit because that's not part of our belief system, but a criminal would try to take advantage of someone by saying, well, for more money, I've got some goons who could go and get you, a human lamb, essentially, someone innocent.
Yeah, it's so sad and so crazy.
Yeah, and in Uganda is definitely a place where this is very real, and I'm working with a gentleman named Peter, who is a Ugandan gentleman, born and raised, and he has a NGO that has rescued over 2,000 children who had been apprehended, and they were able to rescue them and get the witches arrested, and he said once the witches were in jail, they were comfortable telling him and helping him on cases. So it was almost, kind of like a Hannibal Lecter situation where this guy, and he's a very busy guy, and he's doing incredible work. And he said, yeah, they're my best sources now because if I have a question, I go and ask them and they give me the answers. He's like, they've got nothing else to do. I don't give them any money. We don't make them any promises. They're happy to talk about it. They're caught, they're in jail, and, they're happy to share. Yeah.
Let me change gears on you. Let's go to Ethiopia and the Buddha.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What's the Buddha?
So I came across, whenever I'm going to travel, once again, I'll kind of look at what superstitions, what cryptozoological, not beliefs, but legends are in the area. And not because I think that there's animals out there that we haven't found yet, but because oftentimes in small communities, they will believe in these animals or these supernatural creatures. And oftentimes you could tie them back to ancient spiritual practices or ancient deities. So a lot of times you're not looking for the fucking dragon in the lake. You're looking for the traditions around it and kind of the cultism within those beliefs. And one of those that came across in my research before I went to Ethiopia specifically was the Buddha. And the first research I had read on the Buddha was that it is a were hyena. So the Buddha being a were hyena. And really that's all I thought it was. It's like, oh, there's people. And it was, things that were written were very kind of matter of fact. Oh, and, there is a belief that in Ethiopia there are people, witches, who transform at night. Someone said that they ride hyenas through the night and cause trouble and cause mischief. Other was that they actually physically transform into a hyena. When it comes to shape-shifting and the research that I've done on that, which has been pretty extensive, usually that's kind of the surface level. Once you sit down with people who really believe in it and think that it's possible, a lot of times it's that a witch will go into a meditative state, maybe have some kind of psychedelic influence, and then leave their body and then possess an animal, and then go cause trouble as the animal. So, but then when I got there and started pulling back the layers, the Buddha itself, the tradition was a form of prejudice against the Beta Israel, who were Ethiopian people who practiced Judaism. And specifically I went to seek out these communities for a few things. And the more research that I came across was even more specific, was that it was Jewish blacksmiths were considered to be very dangerous shapeshifters. And the unique thing about that, Mike, is that globally, you'd be surprised at how many blacksmithing being a very ancient, very important practice. And it's one of the few really ancient practices that is still can be found almost anywhere, especially in developing areas that have not, it's still a very prevalent trade around the world in remote areas. And those individuals who have the power to transform ore into a tool are oftentimes met with suspicion because they have this alchemist kind of power over the flame, a tie to the devil or to the underworld. And they can summon the flame and they can transform this metal into this tool. So it's like they have they're in some sense they're considered kind of dirty in a way, and they've made this pact and their world is the flame and hammering the iron. So specifically, if we look at a I went to Gondar. So I'm going to Gondar, and we were trying to find what is left of these Beta Israel groups. And the press will tell you that 100%, if not 95% of all traditional Beta Israel people who have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years are now in Israel. And then were moved out through several operations in the late 70s, early 80s. But there are some very small communities within different cities, specifically Gondar, Bahir Dar. These are areas, and we were able to find these small communities and talk to people and interview some of these blacksmiths who said, yeah, no, it's terrible. Everybody kind of like, this is what I do, and this is all I'm ever going to do. But I'm kind of met with suspicion as a trans person who can do bad, and I don't do bad. And so this was proven. I went to the market in Gondar, and in the market, I'm going through, and I'm just looking around, looking for stuff, and I see this gentleman. He's selling plants, and he has this like a piece of fabric with all these little square pieces of fur. I had my suspicion of what it was and why it was, but I said, but of course, that's not my job. Is to ask the question and get the answer, not to make any assumptions. So I said, excuse me. I said, what is that? And he said, oh, these are hyena fur, and it's for protection. I said, well, what is it for protection against? He says, it's for protection against the Buddha. And the Buddha will come and get you, and if you keep this in your pocket, it'll protect you. And so it's amazing that while there's almost none of this community left, there is still the prejudice that somehow, these ship-shifting blacksmiths are out there, and you've got to take this little thing and just to make sure your kids don't get sick, or if something bad doesn't happen to your house or your car. So it's so fascinating that that's what this guy was selling as his top product. So.
But there was another place that you went to not too far where they actually want the hyenas to come into their city, and they've made little special doors. Mm-hmm. And Sir Richard Burton, I think, visited that town. What was the name of that town?
That's the town of Harar. And Harar, if you've never been there, Ethiopia is really one of my favorite places in the world, and it's just so ancient and so unique and so fantastic. And within Ethiopia, there's several, you'll think you're in different countries. So many places are so vastly different. And one of those places is certainly Harar, where Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity is such a massive part of really the greatest visuals in the country and then the most prevalent, powerful traditions and things you can go there and experience that you can't experience anywhere else on the continent. Harar itself was considered one of the great cities of Islam and one of the great places of Islamic teaching. So it is a very Islamic city. It's closer to Somalia, Diradawa, Jijiga. It's in that corner, little corner going towards Somalia. It's a walled city with 5 gates. And Sir Richard Francis Burton went there disguised as an Arab merchant. As he did go to Mecca, he went to a lot of these places in the 1800s that were closed off to outsiders and certainly closed off to non-Muslim people. And he still has, all the gates have different names, but one of the names for the gate he went through the first time is the Burton Gate, where he entered the city. And what also makes, as you mentioned, what makes that city so amazing is that there's other little gates, kind of like a cat door built in the walls that were built specifically so the hyenas could come into the city at night and clean the city like a street sweeper. So they're coming in, they're kind of, I would assume taking out the vermin, also eating any kind of leftover meat and carrion from like the days of the days where the markets and things being dropped on the ground. And so the hyenas are just walking around and people don't dread them. People aren't afraid of them. And some of the interesting studies you'll see is that 5 miles away, people are terrified of hyenas and they won't go near them. But within the sacred city, it's almost as if the city has made a pact with these hyenas since ancient times, that it is kind of like a place where we can all get along. And when I went there, I spoke with a few of these individuals called hyena men. And if you were to look that up, you'd see, some travel shows have gone there, and the hyena man goes out at night and he has all this meat from the market and he'll hang it near your face, and the hyena comes and eats the meat, and the hyena jumps on you. And of course, that's very unique and very special, but there is a deeper interpretation I was privy to when I had conversations with these individuals. And all this relates to that the hyenas are these sacred creatures who chase out the jinn. And the jinn being, if we think of I Dream of Genie or Aladdin, genies essentially. But genies are jinn are something that's mentioned in the Quran. They're accepted as being, I don't want to say the opposite of humans, but a kind of a spirit. For as many humans there is as many jinn in their world, and that they're oftentimes come through. They'll come through the privies, the toilets, the dirty places, a dirty alleyway, a burial ground, whatever it may be. And of course, the hyenas are there to kind of keep them in check so that they don't go into you and possess you. And suddenly you're like, I feel really depressed. I feel really upset. I might just start yelling for no reason. It must be a jinn. It can't be mental illness. It has to be a jinn. And the hyenas are there to help kind of get them out. And so he had said, one of the hyena men, and this is just to compare the two, he handed me a big tuft of hyena fur. And he said, now this is a protective piece of hyena fur to protect you against jinn. He goes, but you have to know, if this was from a dead hyena, it would have no power. This hyena is out there. This is a happy hyena. It's an active hyena. And I wrestle with these hyenas, and they let me just pull some, it's like your dog. If your dog sheds, these animals shed. He said, this is a real protection because this hyena is out there operating right now. And I'm friends with this hyena, and this hyena is a good hyena. So as opposed to the other, we were seeing to oppose the Buddha that was from a dead hyena, it was a very different interpretation of kind of a similar talisman,
So crazy. When I was in Kenya, out on the Masai Mara, you would see the packs of hyenas, and they're just killers. If you were out there by, unarmed, and they tear you apart.
Yeah. But, such a crazy animal. And one of the funny things I'll tell you is in Harar, when we're waiting to do this thing with the hyena man, you got hyenas and cats. And you got like this New York street cats, and you got like 10 of them, and you got like 20, not 20, like 5 hyenas kind of milling about. And the cats are kind of pushing the hyenas around. I know it sounds so absurd. And I hate saying it because I love hyenas. I'm watching them. Are these hyenas like afraid of alley cats? Because they're all kind of like there's scraps of meat. And the cats were just as ready to like go and fight for that piece of meat.
Some tough cats.
Some tough cats, man. Or they're just like, oh no, if we were outside the city, I'd be scared of you. But just like these people, you're in Harar, you have to behave. So I'm going to take that meat from you.
Well, since we're talking about the jinn, which is not G-I-N, it's J-I-N-N.
Yes.
Yeah. The G-I-N will make you see spurts maybe if you drink enough, but the jinn that we're talking about, J-I-N-N, take us to Zanzibar. You were there, and that place, Zanzibar, holds such a historical significance in early exploration. I mean, Stanley and Livingstone coming out of there, the exploration for the source of the dial. It's just got such history. Tell us about Zanzibar. And you met somebody named, I believe his name is Saeed Mohammed. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
And so Zanzibar was at one point its own nation, and then was combined with Tanzania, or as I've heard it pronounced locally, Tanzania, and then they became one place, Tanzania. And so you have the 3 islands, the 3 main islands in the archipelago, but the main one is the main island where Stone Town is, and that's where the first time I went, I visited there. And you have a very heavy, historically Omani influence. I mean, this was the Omani Sultanate, and this was a very major spice hub of cloves and everything else. It was also absolutely one of the largest slavery trade centers in the world for a very long time. And so I've been there twice and spoke with people, and folks really identify with their Omani history. And before the revolution that took place there, folks will take you to, this used to be my family used to own this whole block and used to own houses, and now we have this one little spot. And the revolution, whatever was a terrible thing that happened because we were, this was Paris, France, this was New York City. We were very powerful people, and we had countless money and houses, and now it's very different. And of course now it's especially after COVID, Stone Town specifically, I think it was because they were one of the only places you could go and there was very little COVID restrictions. It really became like this escape for people around the world, and it really transformed it into a tourism hub. Obviously considered a very exotic, beautiful place. And when I was there, one of the gentlemen I was working with is Saeed Mohammed. I couldn't find him this last time I went, March last year, and I couldn't find him. but he was a gentleman who was kind of a gin expert, and that was his, aside from being a fixer and all these, and getting film permits, he also specialized in helping people with gin. And once again, anywhere you go, you're going to see kind of the local things of value will often be employed in talismans or protection rituals because they're special, they're of value. Frankincense, myrrh, and of course, Zanzibar is a spice island. So he had this oil he was making. The base was kalanji seed oil, black cumin. I saw that being used as well with shawi. It's like a base oil that was kind of putting everything together. And he would take that oil and he put all these spices in it, ginger, fenugreek, but especially cloves. Cloves were very much considered to be, and of course, it's a very powerful medicine as well as a spice. The cloves were at the center of it. And then as we, once again, to go back to the speaking of the Quran, he would read from the Quran and blow into this oil as he was making it. And we were walking down the street and there was a taxi driver who waved him and he's like, "Oh, Saeed, please come here. And we went, he said, "Can you please help me? I've been looking for you." And he always has his backpack on, which is filled with like all his medicine. So we sat in the back seat of this taxi cab and the taxi driver sat in the front and he said, "I've been having problems with the jinn. And I'm feeling really uneasy. I'm feeling very nervous. I think somebody gave me the evil eye and sent this jinn." He said, "No problem. Yeah, sure, no problem." So we sit in the car, and the guy's sitting in the front seat, and Saeed's right behind him, and he just starts to pour this thing of oil from like a whatever it was, like a water bottle, into this guy's hair. And I've said this before; it sounds crazy, but it didn't look like it was coming out. It just seemed like his hair was absorbing like kind of a lot of. I was waiting for it to drip down the back and like mess up his shirt, but it just seemed to keep going in. He took the plastic cap of the bottle and started going like this. And then he started reading from the Quran. And then the guy starts screaming, shaking and convulsing and like as if he was having a fit. And then the guy kind of like, "Oh!" And he's like, "Oh, thank you so much, Saeed. Thank you so much." He's like, "I feel great." And like, I'm just watching the whole thing. And the guy's asking how much he can give me. He's like, no, I do this for the community." And then we just got out of the car and we kept walking.
Wow.
And it was just a wild, and beautiful thing. It was like, that guy felt great for whatever happened or didn't happen. He was providing a service. He was providing something to the community. And this man who sought him out found him. And now that man, whether psychosomatic or supernatural, seemed to feel good,
Yeah, whichever. Let's take a bit of a darker ride down to Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking for the voodoo people. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Yes, I've been friends with the voodoo community here in New York, specifically Jamaica, Queens, for, I'd say, God, almost 20 years, and I've always had a profound respect for voodoo. And living in New York, there's, I started meeting folks in the Haitian community, and I was asking them about voodoo, and they always laughed. These are folks who worked for the And then finally, called me. He's like, "Well, do you really want to see voodoo?" And I said, "Yeah." So I met this guy from the United Nations at his house, and he's like, "We're not really going to do that tonight, are we? We're going to the club." I'm like, "You said we're going to the voodoo ceremony." And he goes, "I'd rather go to the club." I said, "I didn't come here to go to the club. I came to go." I said, "Give me the address." He said, "Okay. You want to go by yourself?" "Absolutely." So he gave me the address of this restaurant in East New York, and he gave me the phone number and name of his friend, this voodoo queen, Rose Carleen. So I go to this restaurant and I show up and, I go in, it's closed, but the door's unlocked. And I go in, there's just people sitting there. And I said, Hi, I'm here. And I brought a box of cigars. Yeah, I just brought a box of cigars to that. And I said, "Hi, I'm here for the party." They look at me and they're very confused. And they said, "You're here?" I said, "I'm here for the party." I said, "I have to give this gift to the spirit, the Loa." Oh, go downstairs. And I opened the door to go to the basement of this restaurant I'd never been in, and it's closed. And immediately it was so strange because I couldn't hear anything from upstairs. As soon as I opened that door, you hear sounds like several hundred people down in the basement playing drums and singing and commotion. And I went down to the bottom of the staircase, and this whole basement is filled with people, all dressed in white. Certainly a large portion of them I identified as Haitian, but I also identified folks from other Caribbean islands just by kind of looking who was there. And I didn't know where this Rose woman was. I didn't know, I had a flip phone and I didn't know really what to do. And it was so packed that I got to the bottom of the stairs. It's like being like wanting to get to the front row of like a floor seating rock concert. You just can't get through without being really rude. And I didn't know where the fuck I was going. So I got to the bottom of the stairs like this. And I'm watching, I'm trying to see what's going on. And you see the drums are way over there. Probably like 3 drummers, but they're very loud, and 3 different drums going through different rhythms. I see people dancing and I see fire happening on the floor in the basement of this place. And I said, this is amazing. This is mind blowing. And every time the door would open, I look back thinking it was going to be this Rose woman and it'll just be a different group of people. And I'm kind of in the way, the only outsider idiot who's in the way. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to be polite, but I'm holding my ground. I'm not leaving, even though I felt completely unwelcomed and didn't know what I was doing there or what I was going to do. And then finally, the door opens and it's like all these women in these beautiful white dresses come down. And there's a very tall, big woman. She's like, Justin, Rose? And she's like, yes, come with me. And she went down. And when she came down those stairs, it was the red scene. Everybody parted. And I just kind of got in her little line of people. And we went all the way through the whole crowd. And there was like a few tiny little chairs. I don't know if they were folding chairs or like little kindergarten chairs. Like they were just very low chairs. And she sat me down. She goes, do you want some rum? And I said, yes. Poured me a little glass of rum. She's like, do you want a cigar? I'm like, yes. And then everything was right in front of me at that point. People dancing. I remember seeing like a woman who had to be in her 80s and a child, a female child that had to be under 10. And they were both under the spirit and they were both dancing. And it was just one of the most amazing things I had ever seen at that point in my life. And I became friends with Rose and continued to do stuff. And I was going to a wedding. I was supposed to. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I assume you were the only Mzungu there.
I was 100%. 100%. And
probably for those who don't speak Swahili, Mzungu means?
He's a white person or, general outsider or a foreigner,
Yeah, you hear that a lot when you're in East Africa.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes a term of endearment, sometimes something else. So I met her like 2 weeks later. The whole reason I wanted, because I was going to Dominican Republic for a friend's wedding who's from Dominican Republic. And they're like, don't go to Haiti, don't get Haiti. I'm like, I'm going to Haiti. I tried to go 2 years ago and I got all kinds of, the CIA report, don't go there. It's all this stuff. I'm not missing it this time because I can always go back to DR. If things don't work out, I can get on immediately just go back to the airport if things get super hot. And so I sat with her. And we met on a lunch break. And we were getting lunch and she asked the waiter for a glass of water. She said, can I have a glass of water? I'm like, oh no, get whatever you want. I said, it's my treat. She's like, no, I need a glass of water. Oh, of course. Do you need ice? No ice. So she has this glass of water and she's looking at it. And she's looking at it for about, God, it had to be 2 or 3 minutes, which doesn't sound like a long time, but if someone's staring at a glass of water and you're thinking you're having a lunch meeting with them, it was a long time. Looking in the water, and she looks up and she says, don't go to Haiti. I'm looking in the water and I'm like, with all due respect, I'm like, fuck that. This is the second time I'm going to go to Haiti. And I looked at her dead in her eye and I said, am I going to die if I go to Haiti? She looks back in the water. Says, no, but you're going to have a lot of problems. I said, okay, thank you. I'm going to Haiti. So like a month later, I call her up. I had gone and I had, she didn't give any contacts. My UN guy fell through again, just on my own. And I was able to find a fixer and he drove me around for 2 days and we went to see the and we went to all these places. Even when I went back to Dominican Republic, my friends, the family I was staying with acted like I just came back from the moon. They're like, what was it like? I'm like, what? Haiti. What was it like? I'm like, are you serious? You've never been? It's right there. It's like a 30-minute plane ride. And it was just so much idea that it's, just for whatever, for lots of reasons. And like if we were to go today, of course, there's a lot of conflict going on right now where everything's blocked off by specific gangs. It's very hard to get around. But I found it to be one of the most magical places in the world. Some of the best music, the most amazing art I've ever seen in the Caribbean. And anyway, I come back and I meet Rose again. I call Rose and I said, hey, she's like, oh, how are you? How are you, Justin? How you doing? I said, yeah, I just got back from Haiti. She's like, you went? after I told you not to go, I said I was going. And then from that moment on, we were like best friends because she respected that I was a person of my word. And I was a person that even if she told me not to do something, I had my own instinct. I was going to follow my own spirit. And I was going to follow what my heart was telling me. My heart told me to go to Haiti. And then from there on out, we know a lot of, and just to clarify, she had always told me, she goes, so Kanzo is your initiation into voodoo. And she'd be like, I can tell you this and I can tell you that. But if you want me to tell you, I can tell you A and B, but if you want to know C, D, E, F, you have to get baptized. You have to go through Kanzo. And that was always, she always told me only what she's allowed to tell me. And she didn't tell me what she's not allowed to tell me. But we went, a few years later, we went to Haiti together. We went to Prince. We stayed at her. She has this giant pink gingerbread kind of mansion right on Rue Jeremy in the old town. And I think the story you were mentioning is that we started doing a lot more voodoo stuff. And the spirit I really love is Baron Samedi, Baron Saturday, the Lord of the Cemetery. You've seen, anytime you kind of see a skeleton with a top hat with a cigar, really that's coming as a spirit from voodoo, Baron of the Cemetery. And he's part of a class of spirit known as Gede. And Gede are acknowledged on the same as the Day of the Dead, November 1st and 2nd. That is the day when you summon the Gede. And she introduced me to a man who, if you were to come here, you go to a voodoo ceremony here in New York, I've seen multiple people fall under different spirits. Maybe this time, this person's going to be Dambala, and next time the Baron's going to ride them. They get ridden, they become a hound, they become a horse, and they get possessed by these different spirits. What I saw in Haiti, and once again, I can only say what I saw. I don't say what is fact, what is gospel. I just say what I saw. In Haiti, I saw, because voodoo is everywhere, people will only do a specific spirit. So there's a man named Ola, rest in peace, he's no longer with us. He was specifically the Baron. He would only get possessed by the Baron, and that was the guy I wanted to meet. And he shows up with a top hat, and he's always, and he has this very weird kind of etiquette, and the way he moves was this kind of overly formal, and he would do it and then he wouldn't do it, but then he would act very wild, and he would just be eating hot peppers, and he would be kind of growling, snarling. My friend Ray was with us. He kept saying he wanted to eat Ray because Ray looked so delicious and beautiful, but he's this very wild older character, this older man, and I just loved him. I just loved what a crazy, beautiful, and so I said, Rosa, is he a full-time voodoo practitioner? She's like, no, he's the mailman. So that makes sense. It works for the postal service, of course. And so we were sitting where we were preparing to go to the cemetery. I'd always wanted to go to make an offering to the Baron, to the Baron, and he has a wife, Madame Brigitte is his wife, and so this is kind of the skeleton couple. You see that with like Katrina traditions, Day of the Dead stuff, where it's like these skeletons, well-dressed skeletons. This doesn't look that much different, but it's very different. These are these spirits who are the Lord and Lady of the cemetery. And so we were going to go down the cemetery, and Rose says to me, all right, so before we go, it's amazing because it's like you're walking down there, but you're like preparing like you're going to another country or another world. She's like, when we go into the cemetery, there's going to be people, and the people the tombs are broken open, and people are sleeping in those tombs with the bodies, and they're going to come out. They're going to be curious what you're doing there. She goes, I'm just warning you. When I tell you it's time to go, it's time to go. And so we go down to the cemetery, and we have once again, connections to the ancient world and connections to different spiritual practices. A lot of times it's what was the ancient way and what is the natural way. So a lot of times with any of these practices, you see gourds being used because gourds were the ancient plates. Things being used that would have been used hundreds of years ago. It's a connection to the ancestors. Fabric made of bark cloth, whatever it is with different spiritual practices. A lot of times it's not like, oh, why is that the sacred thing? A lot of times it's the older thing. It's the non-colonial thing, not the non-plastic. It's the natural thing. These are what the spirits know because the spirits are old. They've been around since then. So we go down to the cemetery, and I remember it's like a maze. The big cemetery in Port-au-Prince, it's like several city blocks, and you're just going through the eyes inside of these broken tombs, kind of looking out, and then they're kind of coming out like a Thriller video, and like, who are these guys? What are they doing in the cemetery? And so I remember she had told me, and I heard this from other sources, that if you want to make an offering to the Baron as a spirit, you find the oldest grave in the cemetery, and that is where you can leave an offering for the Baron. There's not a proper shrine. But of course, We are in voodoo capital of the world, other than Benin, of course. And there's a giant concrete black cross, and it's a matte black. It was like the flattest paint I'd ever seen in my life. It just was something about it was very shocking and stunning. This very square, very kind of brutalist cross. And there's all these offerings around it. And so we went there with a gourd that has harang sal, which is like the almost like a salted codfish that we had to cook over the fire and burning our hands while we're doing it. We had to use our hands. We had plantains that we had to cook over the fire and turn it on the coals because we're doing this work and we're going to make an offering to the Baron. And then she put an oil in there and she put hot peppers. And so this mushy, spicy thing that when we would do a ceremony later, it would be kind of chopped up and everything's mashed up. And then it's taken like a communion wafer almost. This like very spicy communion wafer. But we were leaving it for the spirit. So I remember we're going there and so Ola's there. And now Ola's like the rock star of the cemetery. This guy who plays the Baron character. And he's walking around and everyone knows him. It's like he's, the king has arrived and he's doing call and response to everyone. And then there was a gentleman who came out with a whip and he climbed to the top of these crypts and he's whipping the sky, as they said, because the spirits were coming to ride us. And they didn't want us to get ridden by the spirits. So it's kind of a funny story, but I go and I have this gourd and I'm like, okay, she's like, okay, turn this way, turn that way, do this, do that, and then put the gourd down. So I do that, and when I put down, it hits the concrete and the pepper oil splashes into my eye. Ooh. And I'm trying to be very cool about it, but I'm like, okay. And then she thought I was being possessed, so she kind of tackles me and has this powder, and she's rubbing this powder. She's like, hold on. And I'm like, no, there's just pepper oil in my eye. and so we've kind of finished up that ceremony, and then you could see things were getting hard to describe. Things were getting increasingly chaotic. And she said, it's time to go. We have to go now. And she goes, hand this. There was an older woman, very sick woman. She goes, hand this money to this woman. No, quiet. She goes, I'm going to hand this money to this woman because I don't want anyone else to see it. And then give this food to this person, do this. So I did a bunch of things really quick. And then we're just walking. Made sure everyone was with us and we're walking. And then when we got to the door, she goes, you have to turn around backwards because you're not, and we did that when we came in, never walking into the cemetery, never walking out. You're always going backwards. So it's not really happening. You're kind of fooling death. And noise was getting louder. People were getting louder. And then we went to the cemetery and then kind of the guardsmen closed it. And it was like the portal to that other world. It was like your ears popped. You're back in the street and you're hearing tuk-tuks and cars and people. But it was very strange and amazing experience.
Well, how did it feel walking through there?
I mean, there's so much, it's always a little daunting when you have a limited amount of time in a place. I love to, one thing I tell people is if you're in a market or a place where you want to, even if you want to take pictures or you want to have a nice time, sit down until you become invisible. If you're walking through someplace, you're like, oh, here's these big Americans. Who the fuck are they? What are they doing here? But if you just sit down, people get used to you being there. You might sit for an hour. Oh, they're still there. I mean, as long as you're not being targeted for something, you kind of become invisible. And then when you decide to look around a little more, whatever, everyone's already seen you. Everyone's already talked about you. Everyone's already made a phone call about you. That's over. So it's a little daunting that I knew this was going to be kind of a rush, so I'm trying to take in everything. I'm trying to remember. I want to remember everything. So it's like having a wedding and everyone, make sure you're at your own wedding. Make sure you're not just, hi, thank you. You're like, okay, wow. She looks beautiful. This food is good. We paid a lot of money for this food. Wow, look at, you have to really make an effort to not only be present, not only have your wits about you, but to absorb as a writer, as a researcher, as a person, what you're seeing. Being beyond present. You almost have to be like three people at once, taking it all in. The smell. Wait, let me smell the air. What does it smell like? Let me think about that smell because I'm gonna know it was something, but I'm gonna forget it. And then when we went back, we were drinking clarine, which is like the local, like this beautiful moonshine out of a human skull. So she would and other workers would be able to get body parts from the cemetery, and it's very accepted. You'd have, as she said, her boys, who work in the cemetery and would go and get a hand, get a foot, and use it for medicine. Someone took another human skull and smashed it up to bring back that someone wanted the dust for work. This was a different person, but we were drinking out of a skull. And so she said, do you want to taste the skull? And I said, yeah, sure, of course. So she showed me back where, where the bone was thinner, to break off a small piece and chew it. And it was really, it's like chewing a rock. But I was able to put it in the back teeth and just kind of grind it. So we're all drinking and talking and hanging around the fire. And so I had another piece. We're just talking. It's like eating a bag of chips. You're like, hey, I'm just going to have one. But then meanwhile, you don't even know why you're eating the whole bag of chips. I'm just slowly eating the back of the skull and kind of just tuning out. And she's like, you have to stop. I said, oh, I'm sorry, Rose. I said, am I going to get sick? Am I going to get, she's like, no, she goes, that's my skull. You're going to eat the whole fucking thing. I said, sorry, party foul, so.
You double dipped in the dip.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, what a crazy experience. Let me lighten it up a bit.
Sure.
You did this epic swim in the Arctic. Tell us about that.
So, my first passion is cultural exploration, cultural preservation, and once again, textiles, foodways, rituals. I'm happy. Anywhere in the world, just let me find these things, and I'll do that for the rest of my life. But I also, I'm an avid open water swimmer, and I feel it's as we talked about the whiskey swim, it became a way for me to do different kinds of exploration and kind of stay in shape. And also just the idea of using swimming as a form of transportation is something that really turns me on. And I think more people, I see it being something that we're going to see more of in the future is, let's all swim 5 or 10 miles, and go from point A to point B. There's something really wonderful about that. And there's something wonderful about having your stuff with you that you need to survive and just using and I'm sure this is recreational swimming wasn't on the record until more recent time in human history, but I'm sure a lot of ancient peoples who were on amongst a series of islands, this was, if you didn't have a boat, the other way you could get there is to swim. And so the first big swim I did was in 2013. I swam the Bronx River. I had a television show about food. I was really overweight, and the show was finished. It didn't get renewed. And I'm like, I need to do a little bit of a pivot shift here. And I just bought this house. I didn't have the money to travel and explore. I'm like, I need to do something here to get in shape and so I called the Bronx Historical Society and I said, has anyone ever swam the length of the Bronx using the Bronx River? And they said, not by choice. Not that we know of, and certainly not by choice. So I trained for that swim over 6 months and lost 50 pounds just from eating good and from swimming several times a week. And I did that swim, an 8-mile swim, and it was a big community event. It was in a lot of papers, and it was just a fun, positive thing. And I said, wow, and everyone's like, where are you going to swim next? And I was like, I know if I was going to swim, do more swimming like this. And so then years after that, I swam through Newark, I swam through Camden, New Jersey. A lot of them were like against street violence or whatever it was. And then of course came the Isla swim. And after the Isla swim, I'm like, this showed that we could do something on a very large, international, very sophisticated level. I had always wanted to go to northwestern Greenland to visit the Inuktitut people. You have Kanuk, you have Siarapaluk, you have Kettertet. You have those three. They're all on Smith Sound there, Robinson Sound. You have these small villages that are really one of the last places in the world where this really ancient Arctic traditions are still. These are true hunters using dog sleds or kayak, and they don't use, when they're hunting, they do not use ski mobiles and they do not use rifles, I believe, especially when hunting the narwhal. Like they have a lot of very ancient rules that are really respected within those communities. And so that was a place I want to go. So I'm looking at that map and like, how the hell am I going to get up there? What am I going to do up there? So I was pitching to Nat Geo, pitching to other folks. And then I'm looking at the map. I'm like, whoa, is that Canada? Like you've got Greenland. And then if you go farther up, you have Narrow Strait and you've got Ellesmere Island. And I said, what is the closest point between Canada and Greenland? And it's 11 miles. Holy cow. And there's a Canadian military base right at the top there. Alert. And it's right at the very top. So I kept calling the base, seeing if I could somehow do something for them or whatever. It was just dead end. And so then a good friend of mine, Wes Archer, explorer, and he's a pilot. And he said, hey, I hear you want to get up to northern Greenland to Kanuk. I said, I do. or actually I wanted to go even higher. I wanted to go all the way up. He goes, I've got a Cirrus SR-22 plane, and I want to do an around the world trip, and I need a big practice. He goes, would you be interested in going with me in my plane? And I said, sure, absolutely. So we spent the next 2 years. Once again, it's like, I know that a lot of people watching this are explorers and people understand it, but so many of these things are not like you decide to do them and the next day it happens. And certainly as a blue collar person who got work for every paycheck I get, a lot of times you've got to find other ways to get funding, to get sponsors, to get endorsements. I spent years pitching this as an ambassador to Polar Bear International. They were trying to get funding and just calling different companies. And yeah, I did this other swim with great whiskey companies, and they're like, it's too dangerous, it's too far, it's off brand. And Fall Raven, everybody, just called everybody. And it was kind of like the impression's like, well, you're not a celebrity, you're not George Clooney. And I'm like, well, George Clooney's not going to do the swim. It doesn't work that way. It's like they've got this idea of having this thing, and it's here's this person, and that's what we want to invest our money in for marketing, not in some no-name guy from Yonkers who wants to do this really dangerous swim. So it's like you got to place your value and try to really sell that idea. And Wes was so great because he's like, oh, we're gonna do this for as little as possible, but I'm gonna cover the travel expenses because it's my plane and I need the hours. And everybody who heard about this was like, we're not worried about your swim, we're worried about that little tiny plane going up 800 miles south of the North Pole. And they were rightfully so. I mean, just that plane had never done that journey before. And, had to go across Baffin Bay. And it was, really, certainly some of the scariest moments of my life were in that plane when we were hitting really bad weather. The de-icing broke. And if we went too high, we'd freeze. If we went too low, we'd be shaken up like a soda, can of pop. It was just really, there's a reason that planes that small, single engine planes that small don't go to certain parts of the world, but it was absolutely brilliant. He's such a brilliant strategist, coordinator, and he had to have fuel drops shipped up a year before. Stuff is only going up once or twice a year to some of these remote areas via ships. So like, if we don't get this, we don't send this stuff up tomorrow, it's not going to be there in 6 months. And you're like, wow. And he made his route, and I have a jacket, we'll show you. It has the name of all the airports that we stopped at, that are, some of them were, we had a barrel with our name on it, and he had a pump, and we were pumping that stuff in there. Some other ones, we had 15-gallon plastic jugs that we were pouring in because we knew there was none at that stop. So it was such a chess game getting up there. And then once we got to Kanok, which I recommend everyone, if you can get up there, go there. It's one of the most remote places in the world. And 30 miles north of that is the northernmost indigenous village on the planet Earth. Svalbard has something that's like whatever, a little farther north, but is not indigenous. It's a place that we went and we built. These folks have been there for 10,000 years. And they're still doing traditions like kiviak, fermented walrus, hunting narwhal with harpoons. Just absolutely one of the most phenomenal places on the planet Earth.
The swim.
And then I'll take it to the swim.
Yeah. So what happened? So now you set it up for the swim.
Yeah. So it's like, we're there. He got me there. Now it's like, now you got to do your job. You got to swim. And so, as I've said before, people will plan, the Arctic will laugh. And that is the Arctic. We originally wanted to be in that 11-mile stretch. And that 11-mile stretch, we're looking at all these, we looked at satellites for a year, and it's just clogged with ice. It's just absolutely just clogged with ice. It's always clogged with ice. And then it might be open for a day, 2 days a week. So getting up, and it's so much farther, there's nowhere to land up there. Alert told us to go piss off. Like, there's no way you're coming here. This is active war. Don't come here with your plane. They turned away 2 kayakers who were circumnavigating Ellesmere a few years before, and they needed medical help. And they were like, there's nothing we can do for you. You're not coming in here, So it's, I guess, you could say it's like going to the Pentagon and saying, hey, we're out of water. But it's definitely that. It's not a place where they're like, oh, cool, you're here, you're on an expedition, awesome. No, it's not that. And I'm sure that's up to the base commander at the time. I'm sure there's been really cool folks who are super chill, and there's other folks who are like, you should have come here.
Yeah, well, I interviewed a gentleman by the name of John Turk, who actually circumnavigated.
Yeah, no, that's John Turk. And he was one of my big inspirations.
Oh, he's
I read
a fascinating guy.
He's so incredible. So incredible. Him and Boomer or whoever he did that with. Those guys that was really one of the things that inspired when I started researching for this expedition. That was the first guys I came across. I read their expedition frontwards, backwards, read all the interviews, talked to John quite extensively for advice, and those guys are fantastic. Fantastic. And I wish I had that kind of time to do the swim where I could go and just be like, well, if it takes 180 days, we're going up there and we're going to,
Now, you're at the highest village that is occupied by indigenous people.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What did they think about you getting in the water and swimming?
So in Kanuk, everybody knew, but then Sierapaluk, we didn't stop. There's only 20 people there. We came on the way back, and they were fantastic. Mm-hmm. So, and just so you know, so it was 2 boats, 2 kind of seal hunting boats led by 2 different Inuguit hunters, and they took us 110 miles up Denari Strait. We went past Eta, which is Etah, which is one of the most ancient civilizations that's no longer inhabited. And we were going to go to Cape Sabine, which was where the Greeley party was. On the map now, it's called Pim Island, P-I-M or P-I-M-M. The goal was to get to Pim Island. And just so you know, there's usually an ice wall there. Ice wall going from like Canada to Greenland, and then you have this whole open water space there. That is, where just the way that the tidals work, it stays open. That did not form. The ice wall did not form. There's different reasons you could say that. Because of climate change, global warming, whatever, but it did not form. So we just had open seas. The hope was to have that ice wall to stop, have the boat stop, anchor. That did not exist. So we just had open seas. So we go 110 miles up. The goal is for me to start it, and it's now no longer 11 miles, it's 27 miles in sub-freezing water. And people could say, oh, you wore a wetsuit. Well, I'm a long-distance swimmer. I'm a cold water swimmer. I can swim a mile or more in my Speedo and cap. This is 27 miles. There's no way on God's green earth that you're not wearing a wetsuit, or you're absolutely die, and you're going to be able to do it in 10-minute segments for several weeks.
And the water there is so cold.
Yeah, and it's really I'm just directing that comment at the the Channel Swimmers Association. People say, well, it's not a real swim if you wore a wetsuit. It's like, okay, well, go ahead, But so when we went up there, we went to investigate. All this ice so above you've got the Denari Strait and you've got the Lincoln Sea. All this ice had broken, old ice had broken from the Lincoln Sea and washed down, so we couldn't get to Canada. We could see the land, but you had, 15 miles of packed ice between us and Canada. And we're not on icebreakers. We're in these kind of very small fishing seal hunting boats. And so we went and took a place. So the guys investigated, and then we went to a place, I think it was called Refuge Harbor on the Greenland side. And they said, okay, we could sit here for a day or two and see if the weather pushes that ice out. Okay, cool. So we sat for a day, and then one of the captains, the hunters, came and said, I just want you to know the last time we tried to wait it out, we ran out of food. The ice came in and packed us in, and then we ran out of food. They said, how much time do you guys have? What are you willing to do? And then so it was myself, Wes, and our friend and filmmaker, Emiliano Rupra. And of course, they're looking at me and they're like, I think he's telling you need to swim right now. I'm here to do whatever the captain says to do. And I said, let's do this. If you think I should swim now, let's swim now. He goes, we swim now. And so we took those boats, and he's pushing these ice sheets out of the way with his noise it's making is horrifying. It just sounds like the boat is breaking. And then we were going farther and farther in, and you see the ice kind of closing behind us. I'm like, he knows what he's doing. I'm not going to say anything, but part of me's like, we're getting locked in. You're seeing you're going in and they're closing the door behind you. And we got to a nice piece of sheet ice. And he said, this is as far as we go. If we go any farther, he goes, I think the boats are going to get crushed. Swim now. So I got out, and there's more to the story, but I, started my swim back to Greenland from there. And it was just, you had, Wes was in a kayak with my food, and Emiliano was on one boat filming, and then you had the other boat that was kind of our lead. And that went on for 7.5 hours. And I wasn't doing a straight swim. I was swimming this way and that way and this way. And the ice is closing this way, and they'd blow the whistle, don't go there. And I'd go this way. So you're just this daunting task of navigating this kind of ever-shifting landscape. And then we didn't think we could, and then so we're swimming in one direction, and then we looked up. They said, "It closed. We can't get to shore. The swim's over." And then the other guy said, let us take a look in the smaller boat. And I was, at this point, my food had rotted. I had no food. I just had hot coffee in a thermos, and it'd been over 7 hours at this point. And they went ahead and said, "We found land." I said, "Did you find rock? Rock land. Not ice, like, did we find rock?" "Yes." I said, "How far is it?" They're like, "Oh, it's like a few minutes." So that was like another hour. But then when I finally, the dream on that trip was, really second stage hypothermia. I'd gotten my body temperature dropped so low. I remember looking down and seeing, just kept praying to see rock beneath me, because it was infinite blue for 7 hours or whatever it was. And I just like, oh my God, is that a Greenland shark, or is that a rock? And I remember, oh my God, I could see the bottom. And I just was like, okay, I can't die. Just don't die at this. Don't fall asleep. Because I was going in and out, and I just going. They're on the shore thinking I'm fine, but I was in a very bad way. Finally kind of crawled up like a half whatever mammalian creature that hasn't fully evolved, and just like slithered onto the shore. and one of the captains, very tough guy, he just took this football-sized rock and slammed it on my chest. Said, "Greenland!" And I just held the rock, and I said, I was so happy to have made it to the shore. And then, but I couldn't stand up, especially not carrying this rock. I said, "Thank you for this. With all due respect, can I get this in like an hour? Please, thank you." And I'm shaking, and if you're shaking a wetsuit, you're in bad shape. So at least my friend Emiliano was really aware of my condition, and they got me out of the boat, and he helped me get the wetsuit off. And a few things you have to have. You have to have your dry clothes ready. You have to dry off immediately. And then we had these super thermal blankets. Thank God we got the $200 one as opposed to the $50 one, because I might have not recovered. And they wrapped me up. And then there's a bottle of Lafroig that Emiliano had brought me. We had been stuck so long that he drank 2/3 of the bottle, but there's a third left. And he handed it to me. And he's like, "You earned this. You earned this." And I tried to drink it, but your throat is so destroyed from the salt water that I couldn't drink it. So I said, "Well, give me 2/3 hot water, 1/3 Lafroig." That, and then 2 hours, I came back. So then I was just frozen, shaking, delirious, but then within 2 hours, and as soon as I felt that I'm where I need to be, I jumped up. I put on all my clothes, put on my jacket, and I went on the deck so I wouldn't go back down again. My body's giving me a sign to move, take the recovery, but now you have to help your body. Don't stay in the bed and go back down until you get back to town, where they can give you something else. There's nothing else to give me. There's no other way to help me. Now I have to help myself.
There was an adventure race I did, and it was a 3-person team. So we're kayaking across this lake, and this cold storm hits, and we get separated in the dark. And so I'm kayaking all night in this cold rain coming down. We weren't dressed. It was just coming out of the blue. So when we get to the shore on the other side, we're all hypothermic. We got that shaking.
Yeah, real deep.
And but one of our crew people, he had been on Himalayan expeditions, even climbed up on Everest, and he knew exactly what to do. He got some Gatorade. He heated it up like tea, and then we drank hot Gatorade, and that snapped us right back out. Just the sugar and the warmth just brought us back to life.
The salt,
Yeah,
all those things play a part. I love tricks of the trade like that. And one of the things that was, when I was researching swim food as you're talking, is, I got a really good 1-gallon thermos. It was coffee. It was a little ginger for kind of inflammation. And it was either honey or maple syrup. Just so I had all those things. And certainly the caffeine is part of keeping you warm. And and one of the other drinks I call like crack aid was, you take Dr. Pepper or Coke or Pepsi, let it go flat, and then heat it up and then put it in a thermos. It's nothing that you would be like, "Oh, I want to drink this. This is really good for me." But when you need kind of this dirty fuel for your filthy engine just to keep going, that was something that worked really well as well,
Well, there's a place that you want to visit too called is it the Valley of No Visitors?
Yes.
What's that place?
So when I was doing our last kind of projects in Somalia, I met a filmmaker named Kaif Jama, who's fantastic. We became friends. at the time she was based in Mogadishu. She's very much into kind of, she's like, well, I'm a Somali woman, but I'm a filmmaker and I like weird shit. Very open about like, we have a lot of the same. Yeah, she loves, kind of spooky things, and she makes horror movies. She makes short horror films. So she loves the stories of jinn and all these things. And so she said, well, her family is from Puntland, what is the area up in Puntland, Bosaso. She started telling me about kind of Bosaso, and Bosaso has like, there's its own king, traditional king in that area. And there's a place where all the magic comes from that she's never been, but has always heard about, called the Valley of No Visitors. And they say that this is where the ancient religion is still practiced openly. And people say there's blood in the streets from all the sacrifices. And I said, well, certainly we need to go there. So just as soon as I heard about I think as natural explorers, people who no matter what have a natural curiosity, you're not just interested in getting to the tops of mountain stuff, someone who either you have that natural curiosity or not, as soon as somebody tells you about a place called the Valley of No Visitors, either it makes you want to go there or makes you not want to go there. And I'm certainly of the belief that everything in the world stops and you just feel such a sense of renewed excitement, curiosity, and just optimism that there's really strange places in the world that you've never heard about, and that
sparked my interest. Yeah,
it keeps you, and it definitely keeps you young because it keeps you having that childlike sense of wonder of like, oh my God, that's where the wild things are, whatever it is, the Valley of No Visitors. And it's there, it's in Somalia, and oh yeah, they make soup from hyenas and they wear the bones. And I was like, oh my God, whether it's factual or non-factual, we'll find out,
Well, it usually happens that it's not what you've heard, but sometimes it's stranger than what the story is.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of what you do is also not only cataloging and reporting, telling the story of these ancient roots, but also protecting them and the idea of the need to protect ancient cultural practices. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think a lot of that goes back to kind of saying the things that are stomped out by globalization, big religion, modernization, and certainly convenience, and it's a lot of places in the world where it's like, oh, this is the last family to do this thing. And the kids are like, in a remote area, here's the last folks to make this textile. And the kids are like, I don't want to stay in this village of 30 people. I want to go to the city. I want to do with the things I saw on my phone. And you can't blame, you can't expect people to actively preserve something that they grew up with. So oftentimes it's important to try to identify and find these things, document them while they're still here, and also find ways to make them useful for people and showcase them in a different way. That's certainly a passion of mine, is that whether it's a textile, whether it's a foodway, whether it's a ritual, maybe on its last grandmother, who is the last person who can speak the language that you have to speak to do that song or that incantation or whatever it is, and it's like, my gosh, oh, that person died last week. You came all this way and, oh, they were waiting for, they died last week. So it's just something that, and it's lost forever. And a lot of these things, we think everything's been written down. We think AI knows everything. Well, it doesn't. And that's oftentimes what turns me on, is I'll find a subtitle in a book, in an old book. I'll be reading a book and then it'll see some word I don't understand. And then you look at the bottom and it says, oh, thing. That's why I'm reading that book. I'm not reading that book for 95% of it. I'm looking for those little nuggets that were written about 200 years ago. And that's like, oh my God, is that still there? And then I look online, I can't find it online. And then I make calls to people in that country and then be like, oh wait, give me a week. Yes, there's this one village. And you're like, oh my goodness, this has not been written about by all these National Geographic and 10 other places. And my goodness, we need to document this while we still can, Oftentimes people closest to it don't realize it's important. They don't realize it's not important. It's just something my grandparents do,
Yeah, I mean, as a species, I guess, we've spent 100,000, 200,000 years, and each generation was faced with essentially the same problems. And, people just trying to figure it out, survive. And there's so much wisdom out there that just gets lost. And say the noise and the internet and everything is just destroying things. Or when I was in Guatemala, I heard this really sad story. This old woman had Mayan had just died a few weeks before I arrived at this village. And the folks were telling me that she was the last of her people to play this particular Mayan instrument, an instrument that they'd been playing for, 5,000 years. And the instrument, all that music just disappeared with her. And it was just such a sad, it was a shame. And just think about the things that people have seen or experienced, insights that somebody's had that we could benefit from that just disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. To that end, that's an incredible story.
Can you share with us the lessons that you've learned along the way?
I think one thing I just say most importantly is if you're visiting places, really make an effort to be a good guest, to be a respectful guest, respect everybody. You never know who it is you're talking to, and just generally, and common sense, but it's not that common is, treat everyone the way you want to be treated, I won't travel with people who aren't kind to everyone they encounter and treat everyone with the same amount of respect, and I think people in a certain earning bracket, when they travel and they expect the world to just beckon at their feet. And those aren't the people I like to be around, and certainly traveling with that elitist attitude that we come from the US or wherever else, that makes you special or important. You didn't choose to be born here. You didn't choose to have the opportunities that we have. You were very lucky to have them. And to go to these other places, there's people who wish they could have had the opportunities you had, and they probably, and there's a good chance they would have done better than you did if they had those opportunities and not squandered those gifts. So I just really encourage people to really be humble when you're traveling. And if someone is cleaning toilets, you don't know what their history is and their story and what they know. And I think all people have, no matter who they are, no matter what walks of life they are, have knowledge that is valuable. And it's the more people you talk to and the more people you sit down and have tea with or have a beer with, as local or whatever, wherever you are, just listen to people's stories and ask questions. And with all due respect to all my vegan friends and my friends with food allergies, I don't travel with anybody who's not going to eat absolutely everything we are offered, because food is such an important inroad for everything else. And certainly the way I usually make friends and get connections is by asking about kind of really traditional, unusual foods. And then we find them and I eat them. And even the people who are with me who are from that country is like, I've never eaten this before. And then all of a sudden you're coming in with a really profound, and the joy you have by tasting it, the people within the community see that and you get respect, and eating.
Yeah. I guess it goes back to, times way back to the earliest, where that was the mode where you sit down over a meal. That was the time you shared the stories.
Yeah. And sometimes the meal is the story. And, just like sitting down and taking that moment with no cameras, no anything, even local stuff we've done that we're kind of like speaking with people in gangs or just anything like that. When we went places to do stuff, until you broke bread, until you ate, you were suspicious. But then once you sat down and ate, it's like, okay, we broke bread. We'll talk to you now. So it's so important to do that and to do it on your host's terms and to be open to whatever they're going to give you, whether you're drinking fresh cow blood or, snake hearts, whatever it is, they're watching you and they're judging you and they're taking in, all right, is this just another Mzungu, Ferenj? Who is this person? And then once they see you sit down and getting down, then it's like, okay, we like you, and oftentimes you'll hear, oh, you must have been us in your past life, whatever it is. But it's saying like, we respect you and we're open to communicating with you on a deeper level because we've seen how you eat, we've seen how you drink, and you're what we'd call a this in our society.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I just flashed back a couple years ago. I went to Cambodia and went up into the tribal areas in the northeast, and we took a trek into the jungles. And at camp that night, our tribal guides fashioned these basically shot glasses out of bamboo. Yeah. And he pulled out this water bottle, just your basic plastic water bottle, but it had homemade rice wine.
Yeah.
And so those two guys and myself were just squatting by this river, and we each got a glass full of this homemade rice wine just sitting by the river. And, we couldn't communicate other than by smiles and gestures, right?
Yeah.
But it was just such a cool moment, just there in the jungle, the river's going by, and it was just a good connection. It was really cool,
and it just doesn't get much better. You know, you're at a place and you're meeting people, and you're in the perfect place. You're like, we'll make this a little better. It's just some kind of homemade hooch, and it's just like you don't have to have a lot, but it just you really can just enjoy that moment, and also I'm a fermenter and a distiller. I make my own spirits, and it's, once again, like seeking out the blacksmiths. It's really fun to seek out the people who are making whatever it is. And everywhere in the world has their own local, usually a ferment and now a distillate. And to seek those folks out, and not, you can go to the bar and do it, but like go to the house. No, there's always a house. Anywhere in East Africa where you go, almost anywhere, not Somalia, but where you go and you see a stick and something's on the stick. It might be a plantain leaf. It might be a cup. It might be, that is a house where they're making some kind of alcohol. In Ethiopia, it's called tella or tej. Tej is the honey wine, and tella is like the beer. And it's just so much fun to be like, stop. Oh, we don't have time. Oh, you don't want to drink that? Yes, we do. And they want to sell it to you. And you go in there and you buy around for everybody for a few bucks. And it's just one of the most special experiences to talk to the person. So what do you make? How are you making it? How much do you sell a day? And it's a universal language, and everybody's happy, and especially if you buy around for everybody. It's such an easy gesture, but it's just something that, this is the real spot. We're going up this dirt path. I was just in Lalibela, Ethiopia, 2 months ago, on the way to the airport, go back to Addis Ababa. We kept seeing these telehouses. I'm like, can we please stop? We don't have time. We got to catch the plane. I said, but I think there's one right, like literally almost in the airport, like up a dirt path. If we see that one, we'll have time. We see, I'm like, there it is. Stop the car. And the walk was like 200 yards through the woods. And you go in there, and there was soldiers in there. Lalibela's having some, little bit of conflict right now. And the soldiers, I said, can I take a picture of everybody? And they're like, the soldiers do not want you to take their pictures drinking. They're on the job right now. I'm like, okay, but can I buy everybody a drink? Yes. And then and everything was just served in like a Maxwell House coffee can. It's not Maxwell House because it's Ethiopia, so they have better coffee, but like just a big giant can or soup can. That was the cups for everybody. And they're huge. And they just fill it up with this foaming brown broth, and you drink it down and get on your plane.
How did it taste?
I've had a lot of tella, and to be honest with you, I love tej, and I love areke, which is like the Ethiopian moonshine, also known as katikala. Tella is one of the things that I usually don't like, and it has like a metallic taste that I don't know if that's because it's being stored in metal. But that last one I had in Lalibela was beautiful, and it was soft, and it was almost like a kombucha kind of taste, a little sour, a little fermented. And I told the lady of that house, I said, this is some of the best tell I've ever had. It's really clean. And I think you'll see that more in like the private houses. But if you go to the market, maybe they have to transport it to the market. I've had some tell in like the big markets that was certainly rough. Like you're drinking this kind of warm air temperature soup water with a bit of like a metallic finish to it. And it's just a little rough. But I've had some that are just fantastic.
Now, you have an upcoming big expedition that you're planning, crossing Africa by solar power. Do you want to talk about that? Yeah,
absolutely. And I will say that, I don't know if this will be dated, but on January 31st, we'll be presenting this for the first time at the Explorers Club. I'm returning 3 flags Saturday, January 31st, and then I'll be presenting this expedition. The working title is Sahel by Solar. So the goal is to drive a solar-fueled electric Land Rover from Dakar, Senegal to Xaafuun, Somalia. So easy way to find both these locations is the westernmost point of the African continent, the easternmost point of the African continent. And then we'd be going through 10 countries, which include Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Chad, or little tip of Cameroon, Chad, Sudan, or South Sudan. We're not sure yet. We'll see how things go. Ethiopia, and then go all the way through the top of Somalia. to Xaafuun, which if you look on the African continent, it's like this tiny little fingernail sticking out. And then in each country, the plan is to have a female explorer operate the vehicle for a portion of the journey and tell 3 stories about their country that are beautiful stories about culture and history. Because the Sahel specifically, and a lot of these countries I just mentioned, I'm sure, once again, if you look them up, most of what you're going to see is going to be negative, and certainly all the kind of the perception of them is going to be negative places. And the Sahel can be, it's a very difficult place. You've got it from the Sahara down in the Serengeti. You've got this kind of where certainly not where the desert meets the jungle, but kind of within that world. And it's this 100-mile wide stripe across Africa that was really the interchange of ancient trade. It's like where the gold, we think about Timbuktu, it's where the gold meets the salt, and then all that money goes across, all the trade beads from ancient Hebron being used as currency, kind of going through there as a form of currency. It's such a fascinating part of the world that's, in terms of my fascination, is not heavily documented in terms of as a region. And technically, Somalia and Ethiopia are not part of the Sahel. Eritrea is, but, those are 2 of my favorite places where I'm well connected. And of course, I'm going to involve them in my route because, those are places that I can go comfortably and also because we can get to that widest point. If we go to Eritrea, we're on the Red Sea, and we're missing all that Horn of Africa, which is where all the frankincense and myrrh is, and the Valley of No Visitors. So
very cool, very cool. You have a book coming out, don't you?
Yeah, so we're working on getting a book deal right now for The Calculus of Ritual, which will be nonfiction book, which I'll be writing, certainly starting. I've already written a portion of the book, and each chapter is kind of starts with an expedition, and then it branches out into a topic that is ritual related. So you have sacred geography, talking about places like Lalibela, places like Lalish in Iraqi Kurdistan. We've got sacred architecture, talking about, obviously things like the pyramids, and we have a chapter on human sacrifice, and that opens up with my research in Uganda currently, but then it goes 10,000 miles back, and you look down and we talk about everything from kind of nation-sanctioned sacrifice of the ancient Aztecs, where things were very much organized and part of governmental activities, to rituals done to Kali, 150 years ago. And then so that book, each chapter will be kind of a form of human ritual, how it's done, and in some kind of live action thing, that field research I've done, but then also give you kind of a chronicle of all different examples throughout history, and really the focus of why we call it the calculus of ritual. It's trying to understand really what we're breaking down is not whether or not these things work. That's never been who I am or what I'm interested in disproving or proving, but the why. Why would you make a mojo bag and put a John the Conqueror root in it and anoint it with this oil? Why? Okay, well, because A, B, C, and D. And we believe that if you do that, the result will be this. So the calculus, it's telling you the mathematics of why people have done all these things throughout history, And yeah, I'm very, very excited to write this book, and I think a lot of people will enjoy it. It's just something you could pick up, put down, or you could sit down and read it all the way through.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you. And I'm very excited to write it. And
now the working title is again?
The Calculus of Ritual.
Of Ritual. Cool.
Yeah.
Now, for folks who want to follow all of your travels, and
sure,
how would they do that?
I mean, I do regular updates on Instagram, which is just at my name, Justin_Fornal, which is Fornal. Certainly my same website, justinfornal.com. Any of my published works will be there under Justin Fornal. You'll see when you get an area for articles. And there's also my exploration CV on there. So you can kind of see we're updating that with any big projects as they come in. Certainly some short film links. And I also have a nonprofit called the History, Arts, and Science Action Network. And that is HASAN worldwide.org. And that shows the bigger projects like what we've been doing in Somalia. And certainly it'll talk about some of the stuff that we're presenting at the Explorers Club January 31st, 2026.
Yeah, very cool. We'll have those links in the description show notes for everybody. Any final thoughts?
I just, really just what I always tell people. And I said, always do your research, do your due diligence. And certainly I don't think the folks who'd be watching this would be, have those really limited outlooks. I mean, the people who would be coming to a story like this are people who are already curious and already doing the research. But like I said before, is always, whether you're home or abroad, always be a kind person. I'm not speaking to women when I say be a gentleman, but, I always think it's important to operate on a code of honor. And just if you see someone being hurt that can't defend themselves, I get hurt helping that person. That's what I'm supposed to do. It would kill me more to not help that person than to be injured in the process of defending someone's honor. That's really the code to live by. And either you have that or you don't. If you're going to take out your phone and film someone being hurt as opposed to intervening, that's who you are. And that's your own problem. But in terms of exploration in life and just a basic outlook, I've said this 1,000 times, is always let your curiosity outweigh your fear. Your fear of the unknown, your fear of other people. Let your curiosity take you into that place that doesn't really has a handwritten sign and you're looking at it and says, am I allowed to go in there? Am I going to get shot? Am I going to get beat up? Fuck it. Might get hit by a bus or get cancer. Just keep exploring. And you don't have to go around the world to explore. You could explore right where you live, right now, today. Whether it's an abandoned building or a weird little social club, that has beefsteak dinners on Tuesdays, whatever it is. The more people you meet and the more curious you are, the more life stays interesting and stays satisfying, whether you're rich, poor, or otherwise.
And I think it does a lot of good for your soul, just getting out there and experiencing it.
Absolutely. And one thing I will say is you never know the people you might talk to randomly. They might be from another country, and in a year's time, you might be in their village, at their house, just from starting a conversation in a bodega. And you might say, why the fuck did you come to America? You've got a huge house and you're drinking freshly squeezed orange juice every day. This is amazing, So.
Outstanding. Well, Justin, thank you very much for taking the time to visit with us. I mean, you got great stories,
Michael.
I'm really looking forward to seeing more of your work and the Valley of No Visitors.
Yeah, and hopefully you and I will get to Guatemala one of these days. That'd be fantastic.
Outstanding. Well, you take care of yourself and you be safe out there, all right?
Cheers. Let me have one quick, this is Whiskey Matt, so I'll just have a tiny little pour to you and to your guests. Thank you very much.
Go.
And go to the next one. Salud.
All right. Take care. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhardt.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures from the wild places of the world.